Welcome to installing, configuring Apache. It's really hard to do without a local monitor. This thing's out, so I'm going to have to keep twisting around. How many of you have built software on a Unix box? About half. I was afraid of that. We've been kicking this around for several days, trying to figure out exactly who we were going to be talking to and what level. So I apologize in advance if this is either over your head or under your head, depending on where you're at. I'm going to try and do something in the middle. I hope I'm not too patronizing. If I am, somebody tell me. I'm going to start off with basic installation. Before I get to what I put up here, there is a really easy way to install Apache, as Tom has pointed out to me during the break here. There's an easier way to install Apache if you're just installing Linux. Use the RPMs on Red Hat or its progeny. And that will work. You'll get with PHP. You can install with PHP support. I don't think you can install with mod Perl support. Can you now?
Can now?
Okay. It's fairly easy to do, and it's simple. But I'm not going to show you that here because it's just too easy. I'm going to show you how to do it the old-fashioned way that I still use. A number of people do. What we're going to do is we're going to integrate mod Perl, PHP 4, and MySQL support into an Apache build. Pretty simple. We're going to start with mod Perl first. I'm assuming we're going to unzip the tarballs in one location, user local source. You can obviously change it to wherever you want. By the way, all the stuff I'm going to put up will be on the CALI website next week. I'm going to write into Steve to put it up for me. Okay, mod Perl first. Before you can install mod Perl, you have to make sure of a couple things. One, that your Perl is a fairly up-to-date Perl. I'm using 5005-03 because that's what installed using the packages on this machine when I installed it. Apparently there are some problems with 5.6. There's some problems with PHP 4 and Perl 5.6 that have not been, to my knowledge, they've been resolved.
Yes.
They have?
Anybody who knows enough to be worried about this, talk to me afterwards. But in fact, there are problems with Perl 5.6 and PHP 4 that you can work your way around. It was not an easy solution to track down, but there's a crazy person at ExecPC who's come up with one, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it afterwards. The symptom that you see is that whenever any PHP 4 thing is called, the Apache child process segfault, it just drops dead. So there is a solution.
There is a solution out there, which is good because I'm going to be doing that probably next week. The other thing you need to have on your Perl, you have to have a certain number of packages. Yeah. Well, let me try moving this to here. Does that work better? Okay. There are a bunch of other things you have to have in your Perl to get it going with mod Perl. It'll bark on the build if you don't. libww Perl, the HTML parser, MyBase64, URI 1.07, LiveNet, and Digest MP5. You have to install all of those before you install mod Perl. It's not hard to do. For those of you who have ever installed a Perl module, who've never installed a Perl module, it's pretty easy. You change directory to the module directory, Perl make5.pl, make test, make install. Goes pretty quickly. Works pretty well. Do that for all of those. And remember, this is the Unix file system. For those of you who aren't used to Unix, case matters. If it's a capital P, put a capital P. If it's a small p, put a small p. Let's see here. Then, okay, change directory to the usual, to the mod Perl, where I've unzipped the mod Perl tarball. You run Perl, make5.pl, and then a bunch of attributes after it. The first one is Apache source, which tells it where your Apache source is. It needs to know this, because what you're doing is you're building a shared module, a shared library inside the Apache directories, the Apache source, so that when you build Apache, it will include it in. So you tell it where your source directory is. Do HTTPD equals 1, use APACI equals 1, everything equals 1. That will install it, plain and simple. We're using what's called the APACI method to install Apache. It's the Apache Auto. It's similar to AutoConf. I don't know if they just lifted it directly from AutoConf or not, but it's a fairly simple installation process. Then you type make test, and make install. And if everything has gone according to plan, it will come up. If you forgot to put in one of those things up above, it will let you know, and you'll have to redo it. Okay, then I always put in, next, I put in zlib. Just because of some of the stuff I do with PHP, I need to take that in and out of zip files. Zlib is a really nice package for doing that. It's simple to install. Change to its source directory where you're going to target. /configure, make test, make install. I've never had a problem with it. It's been at the 1.1.3 level for a long time, for at least a year. I think it's a pretty stable library. And now for the meat of it, to get to Apache. This is using the APACI method, where you, instead of, the way you used to do it, you used to go into the configure file and change C flags and D flags, all kinds of variables in the configure file itself. This allows you, well, it allows you to do it from a command line where you don't have to go and actually do the editing yourself. /configure, and then there are a bunch of subcommands.
Those backslashes just mean continuing a line, right?
Right, continuing a line. Now, actually, they're in there for a reason. This is something that I'm going to take a slight digression on how you build these things. You can do this all as one command line. In fact, it usually is one command line, hit return, and off it goes. There's a better way to do it. Build a shell script. Now, I've been doing this with building Apache, and I was having problems with getting various things to work on my Sunbox. And so I had put together a text file with all that, and I was cutting and pasting and dropping it in, which I thought was just really a nifty thing to do. And then Tom Bruce pointed out to me that that was kind of dumb because I could just do a shell script. Does anyone here not know what a shell script is?
Think batch file.
Okay. Get away from the mic for a minute so I'll talk real quick.
Yeah, you could write on the board how to write.
The first line of a shell script. It's basically just tells the interpreter where to find the shell.
BIN.
Yeah, that's a BIN. I'm sorry, my handwriting is horrible. You make it executable, you run it. You set the execute bit on it, and off you go. You type all of that stuff in underneath it. You hit return, and it automatically does it. The benefit of this is that later, especially if you've got multiple boxes that you're dealing with, later you know exactly how you configured Apache on this particular machine. I know there's the cache. What is that called? The config.cache.
It's hard to read.
It's hard to read. It's a pain in the rear. It's much easier to have little shell scripts. It also makes it a whole lot easier to rebuild Apache when you're done, if you've had a compromise or something like that. So you write a little script, and those are backslashes. Is a shell script thing that just says this is all continuation of the same line. It makes the formatting look prettier. It helps you understand what you're doing. The first line, with layout equals Apache. You have to specify a layout. This, by the way, all these files are installed or are documented in the install README in the Apache source tree. So when you unpack Apache, you'll see it, and it lists everything. You have to tell it the layout. This is the standard. I'm using the standard Apache layout, which puts everything in user local Apache. That's the source, the root tree for my the server root, I should say. Everything goes into that. You can set up, obviously different things have different ways of setting it up. Red Hat has its own peculiarities. You can use layout equals Red Hat. There are several listed in the file. Just use whichever one is. I like to use Apache because it's a standard file. Everybody knows where everything's going to be. And when you've got multiple boxes, it's nice to know that every one of them is going to be set up the same. That's why I don't use RPMs when I have a Red Hat box, because I like to tell it where to put things. Next one, prefix. User local Apache, that tells you where it's going to be. Now we're going to talk about modules. This is the brilliant thing about Apache. There are tons and tons of modules available that have been written that work inside the program. There's some called the Apache core modules that come with they're automatically installed and automatically run. There are also those that are done by third parties. When you load them, you can specify it. The hard thing to do with building and configuring Apache in a large group like this is that everybody's going to have a particularly different need. And the nice thing about Apache is that you can configure it for that. But I'm just going to do a general install. Show you how to do a general installation. You'll be able to pick and choose when you do your own what modules you want. If you're not sure what you want, just use this because it's a fairly robust one. And most machines can handle that too much of a problem. Enable module equals most. Enable shared equals max. Means throw in all of the modules that are decent modules, good modules, that aren't either deprecated or of limited utility. And enable shared means make as many of them as possible shared objects, dynamic shared objects, dynamic server objects, excuse me. The reason you want to have things as dynamic server objects is that if it's needed, it's called up inside the address space of Apache. It doesn't have to be called up outside. It lowers the overall server load on your machine. And it's usually a generally good idea. I know Brian disagrees. He has security issues, I think, with.
Oh, well, that's a different issue altogether.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Activate now. That sets up the modules that come with Apache normally. Now, we also built mod Perl. So we need to tell Apache that mod Perl is there and needs to be built. So that's the next line. Activate the module, source modules, Perl, liveperl.a, which you get that from the mod Perl documentation. It tells you where to put everything. And then you enable shared Perl. That's all it takes. That builds the configure. When you build the makefile, when you either type make install, it should go through without a hitch.
Are you assuming you're typing this command from within that directory above?
Yeah. Inside that directory, the source tree directory. Then you use the control script, Apache control, to start it as a test. And it should fire up, and you get a nifty little web page on localhost that says it worked. And you should be up and running. Any questions so far? Okay. We'll get to building PHP as well. Until this version of PHP, until 4.0, you built the PHP module for Apache the same way you built the mod Perl package. Do it differently now. They do it using what's called the APXS, the Apache. Do you know what that acronym stands for?
Something like external source, or
External source.
not in my source tree, or hey,
Yeah.
it's over there.
Yeah, basically, it's a way Apache has of building, building modules with files that aren't in its source tree. And since PHP is not going to be in its source tree, this is how you do it. You change directory, obviously, to the source directory where you uncharted the source. Again, this is one that it really helps to use a shell script. Really helps to use a shell script to build it. Configure, /configure, with APXS, and then the path where the APXS script is found inside Apache. You don't necessarily have to tell it, at least the documentation says you don't have to tell it where it is most of the time. It'll find it. I just did a standard install on this machine, and it couldn't find it. So I always spell out the directory. Telling it that we're going to build it with MySQL. Since we're going to be using MySQL as a database, there are other databases in database handlers in PHP that you can work. They have their own flags. Since we're not using them, they're not in this one. But with MySQL, and this is where MySQL is installed on this machine. With config file path, use your local vibe. That's where config file is. Enable track vars. I put that in because I like to track cookies and things like that. This enables that. And with zlib, because like I said, I also use zlib on some of my PHP stuff. So, you run that. and you will get an error. Guarantee it. It is a standard error, apparently. There will be a problem. It will come back with talking about having trouble with the APXS script. Because the APXS script, for some reason, on this version of Apache, this is 1.3.12, which is the most recent build, has a little problem with PHP. If you see those, it says where it says, look for those lines, it's my config this, my config that, my config that. You'll notice in the quote string on the other side of the equal sign, it's just empty. That's a problem for PHP 4. You have to fill it in with, this is all in the APXS script. You have to fill it in with these values, fpic and dshared module, GCC, and -shared. It's all explained in one of the PHP facts, which is available off of that URL. And like I said, this stuff will all be on the web, the CALI website when we leave here. So once you've made that quick little change with APXS, you then type make and make install, and it configures your Apache. Even though your Apache is already built, it configures the http.conf file, which is the file we're going to talk about in a minute that configures the Apache server, and will automatically load the module for you. And so now you have a working copy of Apache with mod Perl and PHP 4 with MySQL handles in it. Does that all make sense? Good.
Who's hopelessly lost?
Sorry.
We have one honest person.
One honest person.
To be honest with you, it sounds like you really do know this without a question about every pit and tittle one. Unfortunately, if I had something to write with, a piece of paper that actually spells this out, and I could put my own notes beside that, going back to the to the web page after this is all done, my brain.
Right, which is why the first thing that John touched on, which was this is if you want to go and compile and build it yourself. However, if you don't want to take these steps, you can just RPM and install the binaries. Like if you install default install Red Hat, it's going to put mod PHP. I guess from what Elmer said, mod Perl and Apache. It'll be all built already configured for you. So you won't have to do any of this. This is more going back towards the term of the pure GEEKFEST here, which is going through the guts of how it works. But you really don't need to. If you're having a hard time following, you don't need to go home and go through all these steps to get to the end result. You can take a much easier way.
Much easier way.
Do it.
Elmer?
The one thing about installing the RPM stuff is you go through all that, and we'll run fine jargon, and then you get into what you're about to get into, the GTP file actually customizing for what you want to do. So like everything up till now, you can sort of get out of the box.
The other downside to RPMs is that they embed assumptions about file layout that, it wouldn't matter if they all embedded the same assumptions, right? If your MySQL RPM is assuming that the web server is located in, say, user local bin HTTPD, but your PHP RPM is assuming that it's somewhere else, then something's going to break in some horribly obscure way, and you're going to end up looking at that and saying, well, where the hell did that come from? And the answer is that it was some built-in assumption in the RPM, and you're going to end up going through and reconfiguring stuff anyway. That's just it's a gotcha to watch out for. And if I were doing a fairly complicated installation, I would want to be sure that I was getting my RPMs either all off the CD or all from the same site on the web or whatever, because I would be increasing the chances considerably that the same set of assumptions about file layout would be embedded in each of them. Otherwise, it can get terribly confusing.
I mean, if you buy, the 6 CDs from SUSE or the 6 CDs terminated from Red Hat or whatever, and you're installing off of that, it should all work together. It should.
Yeah, but if you're bombing around to sort of random net locations and grabbing MySQL over here and PHP over there and Apache from over here, you may run into a few problems.
In which case, you should ask them.
It ain't no big scary thing, but it'll annoy the hell out of you at the time.
Yeah. Especially if you're on a deadline pressure to get something done.
Deadline?
Yeah. Okay, now you've got a working server, now you need to configure it. And this is the part that confuses a lot of people. Well, first of all, Apache configures differently than if you're used to IIS. IIS has the little nifty GUI thing click and point and all that stuff. It's simple. Apache is done a little differently, although now there are efforts to make Apache that way as well. There's something called Command Sheet, which is the GUI interface. I haven't, so you've had a bad experience, I take it. Remember, this is all developmentware. It's not even beta. So the way you configure Apache is using a configuration file. It's a lot easier than it used to be. It used to be there were 3 configuration files and you had to figure out what went where. Since Apache 1.3.6, I believe it was 6, there's been one file, the httpd.conf, of which an example is up here. Starts off with all the usual junk that all config files have. Say wonderful things about their license. And some genuine help. We'll start with give you an example. This is the first thing you configure in the HTTPD conf. It's the server type. There are 2 choices: standalone or inetd. I don't know anyone who uses inetd as a server type. It's not a real good idea. Standalone server means the server stands alone on its own and sits on the box itself. inetd says inetd will fire it up every time a request comes in. So a web request comes into your machine, the super server, inetd, fires up Apache to handle that. Another request comes in, inetd fires up Apache to handle that. Eventually you've got multiple instances.
Yeah, if you're running a website that gets like 1 hit a year, that's
yeah. If you do more than that, and I'd say that'd be about it, you want to run it as a standalone. A standalone works differently. One copy of Apache is running at all times. A request comes in, it forks a child process to handle it. When that request is done, the child sits there for a while and eventually dies out if it doesn't get another request. It's very scalable. The more requests you get, the more children you get. If you're not getting very many hits, you don't have very much draw on the server. So I would highly recommend standalone. And it is in fact the default. Okay, next thing coming down. Server root. You're telling it where your server root is. This should be already there from the way you configured it. Use your local Apache is where I've done it. Then there's stuff about log files, which I don't use. I think many people do, so I'll just leave that alone. The PID file, the process identifier file. When Apache starts up, those of you who aren't familiar with Unix, when a Unix process starts, it's given an ID number. That number is stored by Apache in a file. And the reason it's done is because it makes it easier to automatically shut down and start. Does everyone here know how to kill a process? Okay. Someone? I'll do a rough, but they won't take long. Kill, hyphen term, or hyphen HTTP, the basic ones, and then a number. That does it. That will kill process 650. This will kill it dead. This will restart it. Fairly simple. Now, if you're automating, you don't know what that number is going to be every time because it changes if it starts up. So what you do is...
Tom was showing you how to use it earlier.
complex device, very complex.
You tell it to read that PID file. So it's cat user HTTP .PID. Putting it inside those. Telling it that that's a command you want it to run. It runs it, it will then kill it. That makes opening and shutting things a lot easier. Let me start again. Okay, that's what that file is for. The scoreboard file, some architectures need it. Linux running on an Intel box doesn't. It's some Unix architectures have trouble, parent processes have trouble talking to child processes. They need to have a file location where they can read what's going on. That's all this is. I don't know if any Unix no Unix that I've used has ever needed it.
I've never needed it under either Solaris or Linux.
So, who knows, maybe, you know.
Unix.
Yeah, the next one down, resource config and access config. Those are the file names that the other two files that used to be part of the configuration process. You don't use them anymore for the main server. You can still use them for virtual servers. It can be useful, in virtual servers it can be useful to have separate access policies. And that can be useful, that's when you set those. The default has them at SRM and access. It's fairly easy. Okay, timeout. 300 seconds is equal to about 5 minutes. It's how long a process will hang up before receive and send times out. 300 seems to be about right for us. I don't know, what do you use, Tom?
I think we use that, actually.
I've never had a problem with it, so I've never changed it. Keep alive on allows persistent connections. Persistent connections are a good idea. So you want to set that on. Max keep alive requests, 100. It's how many persistent connections you have at one time. After it reaches that level, it starts killing them. You can set it unlimited, but I always worry about setting things like that unlimited, so I usually leave it at 100. Keep alive timeout. It's how many seconds it will wait for the next request on the same connection. 15 seems to work. There's a wonderful book O'Reilly's done called Web Performance Tuning, which delves into this in great detail. Really fine-tuning a configuration for your particular need. And I'd recommend it if you're running into server problems where you're...
They also have a great book on Apache, too.
Yeah, Apache second, guide second. Actually, we're talking about books here shortly. There's also this new one by Rox, and they're programmer to programmer, called Professional Apache, which is actually pretty decent. Everybody who's interested. Let's see. A little sidetrack there, I apologize for. Let's see. Oop. It's really hard to do on a big screen. Okay. Minimum spare servers, maximum spare servers. Minimum spare servers at 5, maximum at 10. Those are the defaults. Minimum spare servers is the number of child processes that are spawned at any one time. It's how many you've got out there waiting for requests. If you're getting a lot of requests constantly where you need to have more and more, you might want to increase that. 5 seems to, it works for me. Maximum spare servers is the number of idle ones. If it gets up to 10, the 11th one gets canceled. Start servers, down here, I set at 5. That's how many when the process is first started. When you first start Apache, usually on reboot of a machine, that's how many children it spawns immediately. Maximum clients, I set for 250. I think the default, what is the maximum? The default is 150. I use 250. I get increased. The more you increase it, the more, the less you have. You get increased performance for those requests that succeed, but you get less requests that succeed. So I would prefer to have it higher, so I set it for 250. Maximum requests per child. This is more architecture dependent than anything else. Most people set it for 0, which is unlimited. Child can make any number of requests. This HTTP comes off a Solaris box. Solaris has a memory leak. So we set it at 10,000. That way, if it gets up that high, it starts killing it. Because it can, with the memory leak on Solaris, it can be nasty. Shut things down. Okay.
Where's Spark or Intel?
Spark. I don't know about these. I've run Solaris Intel on a box, but I just installed it to see if I can install it, and we haven't really fussed with it. Bind address, listen. Listen and bind address are ways of configuring this server, to binding it to particular IP numbers and ports. Bind address, you can say, if you only wanted this particular server to be available on the local machine, it's a testing one. You don't want, even though your machine is hooked up to the internet, you don't want this particular Apache server to be going out. You set the bind address to 127.0.0.1, the local host, and it would not go out any farther. Listen can be used a bit more. You can also use listen to specify an IP number that this server should listen to. And you can put a port on it. So you can say, like in the conf file has a little bit up here that's been commented out. 1, 2, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, port 80. That will listen only to that port. Or you can also set it to listen to just, if you don't want to bind it to a particular IP number, but you do want to bind it to a particular port, you can set it for a particular port. In this case, it's 3000. There's another command, another directive that will do the same thing, called port. The difference between the two, and the reason why listen is actually better, is that port sets it for the entire server. And if you put more than one port statement in, the second port statement cancels out the first port statement. So you can't use it on virtual servers. And the same thing with bind address. You can't use bind address in virtual servers. You can use listen in both of them. So listen is actually a much better thing to use. Of course, I'm not using it because I don't really need to. I've only got one IP number.
You can also have a single server listening to multiple ports, which actually turns out to be quite handy at the point where you start moving services around, as we often do. If you're running a standalone server setup without any sort of virtual hosting or any other kinds of wacky arrangements, the basic use of it is to get HTTP off port 80 so you can do something else there, like maybe running a squid accelerator or a real server or something of that sort. Then, of course, 2 weeks later, you change your mind about that. You put the squid server on some other port, and at that point, you're changing your listen statement to get it so your web server is running on some other port. Also, not a bad way to hide a test server.
Yeah.
Stick it on some obscure port like 9009 or whatever, and you won't get scammed quite as often.
Quite as often. Depends on the script kiddie level automation. Now for the dynamic shared object support. Dynamic server object, shared object, whatever it is called. 3-letter acronym. When you've got all those modules, remember when we built the module, we told Apache about it. Well, this is where, when Apache loads itself, you tell it in the conf file what modules to load and in what order. The configuration that we did earlier, the building process, puts them in the right order and does a pretty good job. You occasionally need to screw around with it though. You load the module, that's the module, like here's the end module, you're loading it, and this is telling it where the actual module file is in the Apache source. There's a whole bunch of those, and then comes a reconstruction of the whole module list with add module. It clears the modules and then it starts adding them. If you change a module, you have to change it in both places. I've made this mistake more than once. Going, I'll just comment this one out because I don't want it anymore. When you take it back in, it can be a problem. And you're wondering why mod rewrite doesn't work. Anyway, you can add the module and come to the bottom here. You will see. This is from my old box, which is still running PHP 3 here. So you have the Perl, mod Perl, and the mod PHP. This now says mod PHP 4, I think, in the new one. Let's see a little bit further. Extended status. Ooh, I didn't realize I had that on. Extended status you almost never want to have on, except when you're trying to figure out what's going on with the box, which may be what I was doing when I pulled this file. It causes every request to go twice, to time request to the server. It slows things down a lot. The nice thing it does is it gives you a really nice status page of what everything's going on inside the server. You can get a really nice look at what your server is doing at a particular time. I would only use it in a debugging situation. Let's see. Down here. Well, there's the port 80, binding this server to port 80 on the box. Okay, user and group. It's running as user nobody, and that group number is the Solaris no group. I don't know why I used the number instead of the name, but I did. You don't want to be running the server as root. It's not a good idea. You want to be running as nobody or www or some user that doesn't have a whole lot of power. And same thing with a group, because you don't want a hacker getting in that way. Server admin, you just tell it where you want messages in. This actually should be a mailbox that gets read frequently, because if they're in... You can always use dev null. Server name, this is where you set the name of the server. If you're running just one single server. The document root, this tells you where your documents, the documents that it's to serve up exist. And this is a standard installation, htdocs. You can set it anywhere you want. Okay. Now we're going to start talking about some. We need to hurry here. Some of the things, one of the nice things about an Apache config is that it allows you to build containers with different attributes in them. This one is the directory root. It's the directory root for the entire box. What you're doing is you're setting Apache's permissions for the entire box. This is the default. I set it for options none, allow override none, order, deny allow, and deny from all. It means if I screw up later, basically if the default is no one has access, you can't run into, there are no options, and we'll go over some of the options in a minute, like executing CGIs or server-side includes or following symlinks. Any of those things, they're not allowed by default. You're not allowed to overwrite it. Somebody can't put a .ht access file in one of these directories with these commands and overwrite it. You then set the order of things, of denial and allowance statements. Put deny first, then allow. That way the default is deny. And then you deny everybody. This is not the default installation. The default installation is a little bit less than that. But I like to be somewhat anal-retentive about it. Then for the server root itself, I again set the order, deny allow, and I allow from all. That allows things to work inside the server root. But everything outside of the server root as the default. Okay. Down a little bit. You then set up the directory for the files you're going to be serving, for your documents tree. Now I allow options, I allow indexes, following symlinks, includes, and executing CGI, because I'm crazy. One thing you should realize, this is a setup for a box where there are two people as users, myself and my assistant. If I were setting up a box for a few hundred people, for law faculty or for librarians, or just a group that I didn't have firm control over, I wouldn't allow as much as I did. But indexes allows an index of the directory. Follow symlinks allows you to create links to other parts of the tree. I allow server-side includes because I do a lot of stuff with server-side includes. And I allow executing of CGI scripts.
Is there a reason why you didn't say all as opposed to manual?
Because I go through and change them every once in a while. Yeah, you can use all, and that will set up everything but multi-views. Which, you ever use multi-views?
No.
I don't know anybody. Has anybody ever used multi-views?
I've looked at it from time to time, and I've thought about it as sort of multiple language support, but that's about
Can't
as
see
far
any
as
reason to
I've
run
gone.
it. Okay. And then I control who can get stuff from the server. Allow, deny, and allow from all. Okay. Now we set up user directories. Now, a lot of places don't use user. If I were setting up for multiple users, I probably wouldn't allow user directories unless I had to. But since it's only me and my assistant, I allow them. I name them public HTML. That means in their user directory, their home directory, they have a subdirectory called public HTML. That file, that directory will get served. When you do, like for Damien, if your URL was /Damien, Damien, that would then be that directory in his home directory would be served there. You can get to it off the web server. I've disabled, the first thing you do is you set user directory disabled, which again sets the default. I then specifically disable root for security reasons. And then I enable the two that I want to enable, which is Damien and myself. And then for those directories, which you set up with the directory home, asterisk public HTML, This is what I allow in them. Ooh. I allowed Damien to play with this, and he played with it. He put in multi-views. I'm going to have to go home and take that out. I should have looked at this a little more carefully. But anyway, this is a lot to show you some of the stuff you can do. Symlinks if owner match. That's actually fairly useful if you're going to allow symlinks to go some other places. If the owner matches the directory, it'll allow it. One of the other commands that you can nest inside a directory is the limit command. Limit is really useful. Limit to get, post, options, and prop find. Allow, deny, allow from all. So this allows those things in the public HTML directory. Then I put a limit on put, delete, patch, prop patch, and there's a whole bunch of them that I deny from all. Those are the ones I don't want run out of a user directory. A little bit of security. Not much, but a little bit. The directory directive tells you what command, just enter a directory, what is the index, what will bring up the basic file, index HTML, HTML, MSQL, and PHP3. I have to add PHP to that. The new PHP 4 uses just PHP as its file name. Access file names, htaccess. .htaccess is the file. Actually, this is something I should have talked about earlier. When I'm talking about all these directives, they can go in 3 places. They can go what we've just all done up above, which was the server group. That can affects the entire server. They can be put in containers that affect virtual servers. And they can also be put in on a per directory basis in a file in the directory itself. And you set with that command, you set what that file is called. A dot file is a hidden file, so .htaccess is the hidden access file. You can put some of these, not all of them, you can put some of these directives into those, which allow you for directive and in fact file level control of files. Like if you put, require authorized user and using mod auth, when someone tries to get into that, it pops up the little box that says you enter your username and password or I won't let you in, which comes in really handy, as I'm sure you realize. Let's see what else here. This is what I allow in htaccess file. Let's see. Put in here, I'm going to get the virtual servers. We're running a little bit. I'm going to go zip past a lot of stuff that most people don't touch about icons and stuff. If you're really interested in what icons pop up, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here on that. And on log files, how you want your log files run.
Have you talked about DNS lookups, John?
No, I haven't. I probably should.
Yeah.
Turn them off. There's a directive to whether or not it does DNS lookups. I had that originally set up online because I had this nifty little script I wrote that would go through and pull up how many hits we were getting from EDUs, how many hits we were getting from .coms, and the delay on the server, the load on the server, and the delay is just astronomical, especially if you've got a very slow DNS that you're hooking to.
Basically, with DNS lookups enabled, every time you get a hit, the server's going out to say, okay, well, what host name does that IP address actually belong to? And of course, 75% of the time it fails because it's some anonymous DHCP thing in some university somewhere.
Yeah.
And in any case, you're taking an enormous performance hit from it. If you
Huge
do have an interest in knowing where your hits are coming from, and you're running a good statistical package like Analog or WebTrans, which is one of the commercial ones, there are now third-party utilities that you can run over your log files that not only do DNS lookups quite economically in computational terms, because they essentially grab a DNS server by the neck and hold it until they have all the answers about it. It also will quite nicely do them recursively so that a lot of those unknown addresses are no longer unknown. In other words, what it'll do is if it gets an I don't know who you are on x.x.x.37, it retreats to x.x.x.0 and starts going forward until it actually gets a hit for a host name, which at least gives you some idea of whose subnet it was coming off of, and that can, in some cases, be rather handy. But in any case, there are third-party utilities available that just do that at the point where you go to analyze the log file, and typically what we do is run them just ahead of Analog and then run Analog on the resolve. They're quite efficient.
Analog is a really good freeware package.
I mean, we find that we're taking on the order of 8.5 million hits a week at this point across 9 servers, and at a full log file analysis, that takes basically less than an hour using analog, where full log file analysis means not only summary statistics for the whole schmear, but country by country broken out statistics for every country that's hit. So it goes pretty quick.
Yeah.
You turn it off in the config.
Yeah.
Yeah, you turn off in the config. Okay, a couple things. I use server parsed HTML files for server-side includes. You have to set up an add type and an add handler for that, for MIME typing and file extensions. It's the standard one is SHTML. So you set up an add type, text HTML is .shtml, and add handler server parse .shtml. I then also use what's called the XBit hack. I don't like file names that end with HTML. It's odd. It looks weird. So I don't like it. So I use the XBit hack. You turn that on, and any file that has an execute bit, that's set to execute, will be treated as server parse HTML. Bit of a performance hit, but it's easier for me. I think it's worth it to hit. Image mapping stuff. That's not really all that important. If you're using MSQL, not MySQL, but MSQL as your database, for user authentication, which I did on one of my machines, you have to have some stuff for that. Getting all that important here. This is where you set your error documents. Error document 500, the server made a boo-boo, which is the default. I love it. Error document 404. I have a missing .html file that I use. It's got a little, it's got a milk carton with a picture of, your file. Just because I'm poor. But you can have it, anything you want basically there. An error document just tells you where how you can configure that. That's kind of interesting. There's a bunch of other stuff in here that's like browser match, Mozilla 2, no keep alive, browser match, MSIE 4, beta 2, no keep alive downgrade. That's known problems with those browsers. That's set up by default in there in the HTTP command. Let's see. I'm trying to get down here to where I did virtual servers. That's actually kind of interesting. I want to give Tom some time here as well. Virtual hosts.
We'll just spill over into the next session if we need to.
Okay. Virtual hosts. I have one box that goes by the name I gave it, which is RealAle. The library didn't want that as, for some reason, didn't want that as their web server name. I can't imagine why they didn't want it. Library.wcl. So I set up a virtual server. And also, we're the host to the National Legal Justice Library, and they wanted their own URL. So we have them DNS, all to the same IP number, different names, done with DNS. And I set up virtual host to handle that. The first thing you do is you set up the name virtual host IP number, because we're going to be using name-based virtual hosts. 147.9.135.21 is my box. Port 80 is where the Apache server is running on it. And here's the first, this one right here is the first setup. This is the basic server, which is my server, which goes by the name of RealAle. You set inside a virtual host container, virtual host, and then the IP number. You give it the name, the document root for this particular server, who the server admin is, where you want the error log, and where you want the access log, and then you close it off. Also, I use the common file, the common format for access logs, which is set there. And here is the other two. You'll notice they look fairly identical, except the server name, they're virtual hosts with the same IP number, both of them. Server name in this one is NEJL, this one is library. The document root here is under library, NEJL. Here is just library. Server path for both is as you would expect. They both go to different webmasters addresses. And their error logs are given, error logs and access logs are given different names so that we can trace, and they have access to their own logs if they want them. And since I am also the library's webmaster, it's me that's taking care of it. The BNEJL is someone else. And he has access to these logs, and he takes them off, and what he does with them, I don't know. And you can do some other interesting stuff with virtual hosts that I haven't really gotten into, but yeah.
Where is the name of the host itself? You said it.
Way up high, way up high. Up at the very top, it's server name. It's Relay in this case. Tom wanted to talk about one of the modules, but are there any questions first of the stuff I talked?
Let's do questions, because we're coming up on the end of the hour, and then I'll pick up with some quick comments on mod rewrite when we come back. But questions first.
Yeah. Sure.
DevShed.com, anybody knows that, great article on the seamless setup, Apache, SSL, MySQL, PHP. It's so dumbed down that anybody can find it. So you don't need to do it. It's just a step-by-step.
Okay.
Where is it again?
www.devshed.com. It is good. I've seen it. It's quite nice.
That would have been really helpful for this. I could have just been pretty sick and gone home.
Yeah, where the hell were you?
Any other questions? Mark, you have?
Nearly all of the machines that have some subscriptions are platform. So I had trouble migrating. I really like Androids and never had it. I have got one real quick who uses this process from Red Standard and out of Android. And I really like how these primary servers and manage all the things.
What's the nature of hot water, Mark?
Well, typically what I found was this project, library for something we probably had to do fast or whole lesson for us. I guess I'm just asking the question, I don't know if anybody done a migration like that, or maybe am I learning about things that the configuration is so close on Apache that we did not get issues.
I've never installed Android, so I don't know.
I'm actually, here's Elmer. He sounds like he knows something. Yeah.
After 3 unsuccessful attempts to get Android to work right, go back to Red Hat. I ran into all sorts of problems with like packages not laying the way that they were supposed to, and stuff not being able to find itself. So I kind of gave up on it.
A lot of that's fixed in the Android.
Right?
I do know that with ListProc in particular, every time we've shifted ListProc across platforms, we've gotten into what you might call a mass symlinking orgy in some attempt to get around whatever it thinks it ought to be finding that isn't actually documented anywhere in the ListProc documentation. And truthfully, from where I sit, it's more of a problem with ListProc than it is with the operating system. Now, as always with ListProc, we're promised that the next version is going to fix it all. Somehow I doubt it. I just think I'd be ready for a massive symlinking party, Mark.
I don't know, but I don't know about that. I assume that Mandrake would use the same files as Red Hat for Apache. Same file like would have. Anything else? Yeah.
Back in May, beginning of May, people took it on themselves data loss, had an incredibly elegant path of how they faced Apache.org. Showing you how even folks who know exactly what they're doing can screw it all up. So it, not just like on Apache at all.
Yeah.
It's used today in the description. But it's a real good caveat sort of thing where you can see what people are really doing, they're doing and also mess it up.
Yeah.
It's good.
You can't be too careful. You really can't. I highly recommend getting a good book on it. If you're going to install Apache, I highly recommend getting a good book and reading it. What?
There's always rock.
There's always that. It's just,
I
it's too
think,
easy.
though, that with anything that you use, whether it be Apache or Roxen or IIS or any of those, once something becomes mainstream, it's only a matter before it's attacked. People will say that, if you look at BSD and, there's a lot of DOSs and stuff. They don't have root compromises, but they're having a lot of problems lately, especially with denial of services. And the same with any web server that you have. Something like Roxen that isn't well known, that's not used on a lot of bigger websites. As soon as it starts to be used on those bigger websites, the script kiddies and the hackers will pay more attention to it, and then you'll start to see potential bugs come to light.
Yeah.
Anybody playing around with the 2.0 alpha version of Apache?
I've got the turf on. I haven't done anything with it.
Just wondering
I was
how
doing
much this is going to like change all of what you're doing here.
Yeah.
Who
It's a
knows?
good question.
Yeah.
It's one of those things like it's just, you wait till it comes out.
Right.
Because
And then
even
we-
stuff they have in the pre-releases.
And then you run it non-production for 6 months.
Yeah.
Hope
I mean,
for the best.
the 1.3.x platform is very stable in Unix. I mean, I have never had a problem. So,
Yeah. How do you find PHP 4 working with Apache 1.3 with the Zen engine and everything? Do you find it much faster?
the only place I have it installed is on this box. I'm running 3 at home.
I've heard, I haven't played around with it yet. But I've heard
I'm hoping it's faster because I've got a lot of database calls that I can handle more quick time. The Zen engine is supposed to, one of the nice things about the Zen engine is that you'll be able to take and embed it in other things. Anybody else? Is that it?
Let's see.
Okay.
Group calisthenics is back in half an hour?
Yes. Sure. Sure. I was prepared for that not to be very good.
That's fairly fun to picture. I am still installing MySQL and DBS.